Welcome to this installment of Much Read TV, the Skylark Bookshop Virtual Author Series. We finally reached double figures. This somehow is the 10th author event that we have presented virtually. My name is Alex George, and I'm the owner of Skylark Bookshop, which, for those of you who don't know, is an independent bookstore in downtown Columbia, Missouri. I'm so thrilled that you're all here because you are in for a real treat this evening. For some reason that I can't quite put my finger on, I am innately suspicious of anyone who writes a novel set in Paris. But, well, when the book in question is as good as this one, it is hard to remain skeptical for long. Mamta Chaudhry's Haunting Paris is a beautiful read. It's full of wistful longing, heartbreak, and drop-dead gorgeous writing. Mamta's fiction, poetry, and feature articles have been published in the Miami Review, the Illustrated Weekly of India, the Telegraph, or my father would approve, the Statesman, Writer's Digest, and the Rotarian, among other publications. She lives with her husband in Coral Gables, Florida, and they spend part of each year in India and in France. If you have a question for Mamta, please write it in the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom screen, or if you're watching on Facebook Live, you can type it in the comments, and they will, Kerry will get that question to me, and we will get to those questions towards the end of our discussion this evening. I know that there is at least one book club who has read the book and is tuning in this evening, so I'm hoping that we'll get some really good questions along the way. And I would say, and I'm not. If you do have a question, just in case other people can read it in the Q&A, please be sure not to put in any spoilers as you ask your question. If you enjoy this evening's conversation, please do consider buying a copy of Haunting Paris from Skylark Bookshop. We got lots of copies, and if you do, you will get a signed book plate, and also the Skyku are back, and Mamta has written this rather lovely Skyku, and the first 25 people, or 24 actually, because I think you kept one for yourself, didn't you? We'll get one of these as well, and they are composed and signed and numbered by the author. They are unique, and they are rather lovely collector's items. To reserve your copy, send us an email at mail@skylarkbookshop.com, or give us a call tomorrow at 573-777-6990. Okay, the housekeeping is taken care of. Mamta, welcome. It's lovely to see you.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, Alex.
Thank you. So we're going to begin with, if you would, and I don't know which order you want to do it. If you want to do your sort of explanation first and then read, or read first, it's entirely up to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that really generous introduction. I feel I should leave now because it can't possibly get any better. But although you and I have never met, Alex, I've spent some delightful hours in Paris with you, thanks to the Paris hours. And even when we are staying home, as many of us are these days, we can still travel the world thanks to the magic of books. And even in this time of isolation, we can remain connected thanks to the magic of bookshops. I'm just thrilled to be at Skylark, and also to spend some time with all of you in one of my favorite haunts, which is Paris. You know, it's one of those cities, as Alex might have some thoughts to share later on, that's very easy to love, but very hard to know. And the first time I visited the city, I was warned by friends, both American and French, that to cross the threshold, c'est difficile. Well, for me, it seemed more than difficile, it seemed impossible. I'm so clearly an étrangère, a stranger, a foreigner, an outsider. I have to tell you right off the bat, I didn't set out to write about Paris, and certainly not from this perspective. You know, I'm not French. évidemment, not Jewish, neither man nor ghost. But that was the voice I heard, and I felt compelled to follow it wherever it took me. And one of the things that I found a purchase on writing about Paris was that the ghost is the ultimate outsider. And Alex and I can talk about this later, but any writers who are in the audience may also want to pipe up later. But sometimes we don't choose our stories. Sometimes they choose us. And so it was with this story. One day I was walking down a street on Île Saint-Louis, and I heard a drift of music coming down from a lighted window. And I couldn't see who was playing, but I had this really vivid image of a man sitting there listening very attentively. And I kept returning to that image, to that piece of music. And as you'll see, the man was Julien, drawn back to the woman he loved and the place he called home while he lived. The music had summoned him back to this world where he had unfinished business. So the novel is set in the summer of 1989, when Paris is getting ready to celebrate the bicentennial of the French Revolution, that seminal moment that gave us the glorious motto, liberté, égalité, fraternité. I mean, you cannot walk literally a block without bumping into the motto chiseled into a public monument or in a building. But Sylvie is up in her apartment on Île Saint-Louis, mourning the loss of Julien, who had died a few months before. Then, quite by accident, she dislodges a letter from his desk. Now, she knew that Julien's sister and her daughters had perished during the Holocaust. What she didn't know was that Julien believed that one of the little girls might have survived, and he spent years secretly tracking his niece. So Sylvie takes up the quest where Julien left off, and she doesn't know that she's watched over by Julien's ghost. And this quest leads her back deep into the secrets of Julien's past and into the year 1942, Nazi-occupied Paris, when the Jews were being up to its own glorious motto of liberté, égalité, fraternité. So this is a love story in which one of the lovers is dead. It is a mystery in which the detective is a pianist who is so cripplingly shy that her nickname is Sylvie la Timide. A historical novel in which events that we thought were in the past have urgent resonances for today, and a ghost story in which the ghost is the least terrifying thing of all. So because of the title of the book, I often get asked, do you believe in ghosts? Do I believe in ghosts? No, of course not. And yet, when you are in Paris, they always keep you company. And they're particularly thick around Île Saint-Louis. What draws you back, I want to ask them. But when I turn to look over my shoulder, they retreat into the shadows and into silence. So I'll just tell you a little bit about the setting. Many scenes in the novel take place in and around Notre Dame, but behind Notre Dame's soaring towers that reach for the sky is a museum that sinks into the earth. And it was at the deportation memorial that I became aware of the shadows underpinning the City of Light. And that's when my story took a darker turn. At the memorial, there's a bronze circle on the floor chiseled with the words, "They went to the end of the earth and they did not return." And then my hair stood straight up as I remembered the French word for ghost, which is revenant, one who returns. So that became the first line in my book. I'll just read you a few paragraphs. And I also had the answer to my question, what draws you back? Let me take a sip of water. It should be wine since we are, sort of nostalgic for Paris, but I want to be coherent at least for the next hour. They call us revenants, those who return. Restless for this world, we pass each other in mute recognition, for to be silent and solitary is our essential condition. But death doesn't end our thirst for a human touch, a human voice calling our name. And so I haunt these familiar caves, this familiar river. Music drifts down from Sylvie's window, and I linger until it comes to an end. The scent of lilacs on the breeze stirs dormant phantoms to life, but music is sorcery more potent. Though bound to time's measure, it exists on a plane beyond time, where there is no past and no future. There is only the present, in which the dead revisit this world. Night after night, I wait until the last notes fade away and Sylvie comes to the window at last. I retreat into the shadows as one after another the beautiful mansions along Quai d'Anjou spring to light, transforming those in the gloom below into a throng of ghosts. Occasionally, a passing figure pauses in a pool of lamplight to light a cigarette or glance at a watch. Squandered time, the most enduring of regrets. In the end, a lifetime is not enough. The heart yearns for more. Who can reason with desire? The heart has its reasons that reason cannot know.
Oh, that's just lovely. Yes, I love that line, the squandered time, the most enduring of regrets. It's an absolutely stunning, stunning opening to a novel. And it beautifully captures the atmosphere that you create. And we're already sort of asking ourselves as readers the question about what's going on. And, you know, as you said, and I was keeping this question to the end because I didn't want to sort of give too much away. But as you say, Julien is a ghost. And it feels that the dead inhabit this book almost as much as the living do in their memories of those who have been lost. There's an actual ghost. And there's one lovely line when Sylvie is thinking of her husband, and she says she feels she has lost him a second time, not just to death, but to silence. And there's this constant dialogue between the past and the present, because some of what we learn, of course, is in flashback. But and it struck me that was entirely appropriate, particularly in a place like Paris, where the sense of history is so palpable. And as you said, these ghosts linger around every corner and then withdraw the minute you turn around to try and see them. But there's also a sense, I felt, that none of us can escape our pasts, even if we wanted to. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about that and about how the past and the present sort of interlock and sort of and talk to each other.
Yeah, and after I do, I'm going to turn the question right back to you because it's such a fabulous question. You know, what William Faulkner said about the past, that the past is never dead, it's not even past. And I think that's true. This whole book is just absolutely filled with loss and yearning. And although Julien is the one who is dead, Sylvie is hardly alive at the beginning. You know, they are both coping with loss. They are both hollowed out by it, in the way that she is grieving for Julien, the way he lived his life, grieving for the sister who perished in the Holocaust. But apart from a family that has been just devastated, you start to think about how many families there were. And then you think, you know, the whole city has been hollowed out by this loss, and that it's not just a moment of reckoning for her, but a moment of reckoning for the city, for the country, because what's been lost is the very idea that France has of itself. So, you know, this book has two time periods that it's anchored to, 1989 and 1942. But as a ghost, Julien can access a deeper past and go back to other times in French history that, you know, those who are living would not have such immediate access to. So let me ask you, Alex, so what about the past in your book? I know the year is 1927, so it's before the war rather than mine, which is during and after. So how did you have that sense of the absolute immediacy of the past for the characters?
Yeah, I mean, it was, you know, I mean, one of the things that I did was to tell my story over the course of one day, and which meant that sort of construction meant that there were flashbacks going all the way through, and so they were very, and so the reader was sort of was in the day and then was taken back and in the day, and that I think gave the past an immediacy, because there was this constant back and forth in much the same way that you do in Haunting Paris. I mean, that was one of the sort of parallels that I noticed was that, and I do think it, you know, we're all a product of, you know, as Faulkner said, we're all a product of where we came from and of that past, and so it kind of made sense to me to do that. Yeah, so it's fascinating, and you know, you can't escape it. You can get on a plane and go to a different country, or at least you used to be able to, but you're still you can't ever get away from any of that stuff. And there was a sense of, I might as well just throw these notes away, because this I can tell already. I had this sort of carefully constructed set of questions leading beautifully in a particular direction, but never mind. There is a sense in the book, I felt, of a certain degree of, since we're talking about sort of traveling and things, of claustrophobia. And maybe it's because I know the Île Saint-Louis, which is a tiny, tiny island, and most people think of the Île de la Cité, but they almost sort of forget about this little thing tacked on the back. And there are these tall buildings, and there's basically just one street that goes along it. And there's a good line which I really liked, if I can find it, when you were talking about the Île Saint-Louis, and you say it's desirable not for what it offers, but what it lacks. So there is no post office, and there's no metro station, and all of these things. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about why you chose to set so much of the novel. Obviously, Sylvie, when she goes to the left bank and she goes into the Marais. But for me, it felt like the heart of the book was there in the Île Saint-Louis. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about why you decided to set so much of the book there. What was it about the island that so pulled you in?
Well, for one thing, I love it. For another, I know it better than many parts of Paris, you know, so even though it's not my city, that place feels more like home to me. Also, you know, you cannot but be shaped by what you have read, what you have heard, and there were so many writers, musicians, architects. I mean, the Île Saint-Louis was a magnet for all sorts of creativity. So I felt very attracted to it. And I think that one of the things that you were saying, about it lacking so many things. It does have a post office now, which opened
yes.
up recently. Before you had to cross the bridge to go post a letter. But it's that sense of having so little of what people come to Paris for, like grand museums and stuff, that it's almost you can step back in time. And, you know, as in your book, time and memory are central to mine. Like you talk about Proust in your book, and in mine, I think for both of us, a lot of what the book is about recapturing or restoring something that has been lost. And both memory and time are so peculiar. You know, they don't move in a linear fashion. Your memories don't just unspool like a newsreel. You have these bright spots of time that are so vivid, and the rest of it just sort of is white noise or white space. And the memories are linked to time because you always remember something that is in the past, you know, so the two are linked. And in my case, okay, so everyone here, I am sure, has this feeling of, now that we are in lockdown for the most part and at home, that time has become really bizarre. You don't know what day it is. You don't know which month it is. You have a sort of sense of time passing. And I always think of this. Do you remember that Dali painting with the melting clocks?
Sure,
You know, where clocks are just melting down. Hey, get this. The painting is called The Persistence of Memory. So I felt that's a perfect, you know, feeling and ambience for what we are going through now and for what the book is trying to recapture.
That's interesting. Well, one of the things that struck me about the book is how it really feels like it's examining how we excavate those memories, and in a lot of different ways. Because we have flashbacks, but the flashbacks are told from multiple different points of view. There are also there are photographs, and there is an article from a magazine. There are mementos and Shakespeare sonnets and music, of course, and there are all of these different ways. And I just thought it was very interesting the way that you sort of peeled back. There's almost like the mechanics of memory, and there are lots of different. It isn't, as you say, it's not a simple thing. It's a very abstruse. It can be very difficult to sort of put your finger on exactly why you remember a particular thing. I remember being told a long time ago that smell is the sense that is most closely linked to memory, and which I just personally, that makes complete sense to me. But I also think that you know, music is another one as well. So I just thought it was fascinating how you did that, and how beautifully you sort of unspooled, because at the beginning you don't have a sense of where the book is going and the dark turn that it's going to take, which again I think is a little bit like memory. You know, sometimes you find yourself remembering things that you would much rather not remember. And I don't think that there was actually a question at the end of all that, but I was just but it was just
No, but the two things you said that sparked something in me. I'm glad you threw out your notes, because this is going in, you know, unexpected directions. Well, one was the excavation, and you know, that is very true of how we uncover buried memories. And since Julien was, while he lived, he was a psychoanalyst, obviously memories were very important to him. And here's what Freud had to say about memories, that, you know, when we bury something, repress it, it returns with a vengeance. It's almost like a ghost that has come back, that has been hidden from view, but is now made apparent. And the other thing was that you talked about music, and you use a lot of music. You talk about, there's a scene, a chapter called Rhapsody, where you describe Gershwin's music in words, and immediately both my husband and I, when we read the book, said, Oh, we know what that is. So it's hard, I think, to write about music and convey a sense of that music. But my book is completely permeated with music, with Chopin, with Schubert, with the fact that Sylvie is a classical pianist. And, you know, I will confess that that's something I would have loved to have been, but I don't have a scrap of musical talent.
Well, so
So,
one of my questions was, do you play?
oh, I used to work for a radio station, classical radio stations in several different cities, including Miami and Dallas. So it gave me just great pleasure to be able to say, and now I will play Mozart's 27th Piano Concerto. And of course, it just meant in the old days putting on an album, in the new
Right.
days a compact disc. But it was as close as I could get
Okay.
to playing music. And then, you know, just in the course of writing about music, I realized that, okay, I don't have any talent for it, but I'm a very good listener. But I
You,
do have an instrument I play, and that is language, you know, which is true in your case too, that it's the language that evokes everything, and the tempi and the tone and everything. So
so you clearly are a good listener, because I mean, yes, as you say, I mean, I have always in all of my books written a lot about music, and there's always music in there, and I enjoy it. I find it's a challenge. It's an interesting technical challenge to convey one artistic medium in another.
mhm.
But far more than that, it's about getting to the essence of the thing. And I think that's where and often when I read, I mean, writers fall into two different categories, and you can call them what you want, but there are writers for whom when they write about music, it's totally convincing, and they get it. And then it's writers who don't get it, and they might write lovely sentences, but you just don't get the sense that they really have sort of locked into the thing. And you were so clearly in that first category. I completely was swept away and believed in your descriptions. And I think I did that because there's a line when Julien recalls, and I'm just going to quote here: "For the rest of my life, I would remember those last notes, how they had asked, 'Do you?' And the answer came firm and clear, 'I do.'" And that idea that that's what music does, it's like it speaks to us. I mean, literally it speaks to us in this way, which I just thought was gorgeous. And I'm always interested in, so I did have down, one of my questions was, do you play? Because I do think that writers who play music are, it just makes it all the more impressive that you can do what you did if you don't play. But maybe I'm asking the wrong question, and maybe the question ought to be, well, do you listen? And that's a more important one than do you play? And I wanted to ask you whether you had ever read The Time of Our Singing by Richard Powers.
No, I haven't, but it
Okay.
sounds like I should.
You
So I'm
have,
going
I
to
mean,
make a note.
it's one of my favorite books of all time. It's an extraordinary book for many reasons, and Powers is an amazing writer. But he writes, and it's a story about a family. I mean, I'll try and keep it brief. Over the course of several decades, and with two young prodigies, musical prodigies, two brothers. And I don't believe that Richard Powers has any music background, but my goodness, he wrote. It was so convincing. It was so completely brilliant, the way that he wrote about music. And it was like you could hear stuff going on. There was, what's the famous, it's a Forster book where they go and they go to the symphony and they listen to
Oh,
some piece of music, and
Howard's End. Is it
yes,
Howard's
Howard's End,
End? Yes.
and
Yeah.
he's describing the things and entirely
Mm-hmm.
sort of in metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of a bit like that, but just wholly convincing. Um, uh, and I just found it so interesting. So one question I did want to ask you was about the choice of the music, and whether Chopin and was there a particular reason why you chose those pieces over other pieces?
Yes, I did. There were so many things that were random about this book that I'm so thrilled you asked me about something that was actually a choice. Um, that Chopin Barcarolle, which you quoted that line from, and if you listen to the final notes, that's exactly how they sound. But also that Chopin had such a link to Paris,
Sure.
and he actually played at the on Île Saint-Louis at the Hotel Lambert. So it was just in that setting,
Got it.
and he played this piece of music at his last concert in Paris. And he was so weak and feeble by then that he couldn't play the notes fortissimo, and he played them, in a very soft way. And people said that they had never heard it better. So
Oh, great.
the
Wow.
Barcarolle is a piece I love. Schubert is somebody I love,
Yeah.
but not all Paris is classical music. And um, I don't know about you, because you had four different stories going, and obviously four different characters. One of whom I like very much, is Camille, who worked for Proust. And Proust wrote about a piece of music, the Vinteuil Sonata, that still I feel like I know that piece of music intimately just from having read about it. And I was going to say something particularly brilliant, and it'll come to me. Oh, yeah. Sometimes the brilliant thoughts just sort of wander
They
off
just
and
they,
don't
they
come
waft
back.
up. Yeah, and I know Proust used to have string quartets come to his apartment at sort of 2 o'clock in the morning to play for him, which is like, it beats having a CD player, I guess.
I
Like,
guess so.
"All right, bring them round. They can play."
That's
Um,
right.
oh, that's a
And
wonderful story about
I want
Chopin.
the brilliant part now, it doesn't seem so brilliant, but what came back to me was that, what's so important with your different characters and with mine is that each one has a voice. So, I mean, that's like
Mm.
not the time of our singing, but the way of our singing. And so, for instance, Ana Carvalho, who's the
Mhm.
Portuguese
I loved her.
concierge,
Yeah, she was great.
she doesn't like all this classical music. It sounds too lugubrious to her. She wants some bal musette melodies.
Mhm.
And then there's just every character responds differently to music. So I think that's also something that Paris accounts for, the music of the streets. You hear all sorts of music,
Sure.
and I
Yes.
wanted it to be part of
And
that.
of course, people think about accordion players and other cliches like that, but there's so much. There's a wonderful book that I think is out of print now called The Hat of Victor Noir. Don't ask me who wrote it. Victor Noir is a somebody who was a real person, and his grave is in Père Lachaise, and there's some myth about fertility or something that to do, and he's got anyway. But part of the novel is set on the Fête de la Musique that they used to have every year. So if you can find a copy of that book, I highly recommend it. And again, it just talks about, the Fête de la Musique. There's just music on literally every corner, and it's just the most extravagant and wonderful night in Paris, and it's really wonderful. Well, so on the subject of Paris, I loved Will, the American. There's an American couple who live next door to Sylvie, and they're there for the summer. And Will very much wants to know Paris during his time there, and he sort of wants to, as I think a lot of people probably do, sort of avoid the tourist destination. Actually, what he really wants is an invitation to dinner from a real Parisian. That's what he really wants in a Parisian apartment. And there's that you write at one point, the city will keep all its secrets, and he will leave behind lives he can only imagine and names that he will never know. So you weren't born in Paris. I wasn't born in Paris. We've both spent a lot of time there, but I did think that that was an interesting comment. And do you think that Paris is a city that the outsider can ever know?
Um, can we know any city? You know, I mean, no matter how many stories you tell about places, do we even really know people we love, let alone places? They all guard their mystery, you know, to some extent. But I think with Paris, and, you know, this was the sense I got from the first moment I went there, I would just look into these lighted windows and imagine the lives going on there. But really, I was transporting myself into those lives. I mean, there's something about Paris that is so cinematic. It's like when you're watching a movie, you are in the frame of that. So I think at some point, we all feel like if I go to a different place, as you were saying, if we got on planes, you never really leave yourself behind. You take yourself with you.
Right.
But you always have this thing that, oh, if I lived in Paris, I would certainly be a different person. Or if I lived in Venice, and then you go there and you find out that, you know, you're exactly the same, except you're more lost because you're in an unfamiliar setting.
Right. You might be more caffeinated, possibly. That might be one.
Right, exactly, which is extremely important, as Proust knew.
Yes, indeed. So did you always know that you were going to write about Paris, or did I mean, what came first? I mean, you told the story about hearing the music come through the window, but were you already planning to write about Paris at that point, or not?
You know, it never crossed my mind. And this, everyone says this is my debut novel, which gives me a bit of a shock because I feel I must be the world's oldest debutante. But you know, it is the first novel that was picked up for publication by Nantalise. Thank you very much.
Yes, I mean, wait, that's not a bad way to begin, Mamta.
Yes.
Thank goodness,
Yes,
for legends.
Several decades later than I wanted, but hey, I'll take it. And she published it and she edited it, so I was very lucky. But I had written other novels. I wrote about India, I wrote about Miami, and you know, they were roundly rejected. I mean, it would have been better if they had said, go back to your day job, but there was just enough praise there to keep you going, even though nobody was clamoring for me to write a novel about Paris. I think after all those rejections, I sort of said, okay, the heck with it. You know how Monty Python says, and no for something completely different.
Yes.
So, so that's what I thought. I thought I'll write something light and bright and sparkling, kind of like Midnight in Paris. And it'll be a love letter to Paris. And well, you can see from the first page that I read that it certainly immediately went into a darker place. But it is still a love letter because, you know, love can also be layered and complicated and heartbreaking. So no, I never set out to write about Paris, but I did.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So I've got another question about and we haven't really touched on this yet, and we'll talk about sort of the turn to the dark side. So, you know, you did mention briefly, so 1942, it's one of the darker periods of French history, and I don't know, tens of thousands of Jews are rounded up and taken to Drancy. And one of the questions that I had is, which just was of interest to me, and maybe it's only of interest to me, in which case I apologize to everybody else. But, you know, I mean, there are lots and lots of novels are set in Paris during World War II, and they usually, the Germans and the Nazis are in full display, and they are marching to jackbooted down the Champs-Élysées, and they give the reader someone to hiss at. You know, there's very, very clearly delineated good guys and bad guys. It was very interesting to me, and I'm sure entirely on purpose, that the people who came knocking to take the family away were not Germans. They were two French policemen. And I wonder whether you could talk a little bit about that and about that decision that you made to do that. I thought it was very interesting.
Well, actually, you know, this is something since I started researching this, and you know, when you start researching, you sort of go into nooks and crannies.
Sure.
I thought your word about excavating was brilliant, because Paris is a city that's built on so many layers. You know, if you go
Literally,
to,
yes.
literally, yes.
Yeah.
If you go to the front of Notre Dame, where they have the Parvis, you can see those layers excavated. So as I was researching, this was something I found that was actually the case, that the French gendarmes and the French police officers were the ones who were sent to knock at the door and round up people. And I think this also touches on something that is so crucial to the book, is the whole subject of silence. You know, those années noires are something that people who lived through them never talk about. Yeah. And I think it's something that the French never talk about. It's only recently that there has been an acknowledgement and a reckoning with their role in it. You know, as you said, it's so easy to put it on les Boches and say that, oh, they were the ones.
Right.
But their silence meant complicity. Their silence showed that not all of them spoke up, either because of cowardice or because they were complicit.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think that the legacy of sort of Pétain and is a very complex one, and in a way it's more, you know, because it isn't as cut and dried. And you know, they would have said, well, we were trying to protect the country by doing this, and we weren't collaborating. Well, yes, you were, but they could at least justify it in some way. So it is interesting how and I think there are more stories to be told there for sure. But I did think that was very interesting because it just adds an extra layer of complexity. And yeah, the French are still, I think, coming to terms with it. And it's been a longer journey for them than the Germans, for example, because it was almost easier for the Germans to go, yeah, well, that was terrible.
Bad, yes.
And
quite right.
But where the French, you have the collaborators and you have the résistants, and so it's just there is a more of an internal conflict there, which is sort of ripe pickings for people like you and me in terms of telling stories. So, all right. So we've also talked on the subject of darker things. We have a question from Linda. And she's asked both of us, but I'm just going to ask you. So could you talk about how you were able to so vividly describe the grief of your characters?
You know, there's a school of thought that says that you have to just write about what you know. And I haven't been through that kind of all-encompassing grief, although of course I've had sorrow in my life. But I just wonder why we were given imagination if we're not to use it, why we were given empathy if we're not to use it. And if that grief rings true to you, Linda, thank you for saying that, then that means that I have entered into that character. I'm no longer somebody who is observing a character going through it, but I am that character. I am all the characters who are experiencing what they're experiencing. And I think, Alex, you could talk to that about grief. I mean, with Sauron and the immensity of that loss, which for those of you, I'm sure, who read The Paris Hours, you know what I'm talking about. So how was your depiction of grief?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, you know, let's stipulate, you know, I have not had, well, I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't read it, but I haven't suffered what I put my poor characters through. And Jim has written Write What You Know is Hemingway. And I mean, it is something that you hear time and time again as a writer as advice, but I'm not convinced that it's especially good advice. And I know that Anne Patchett would tell you, don't write what you know, write what you want to know. Go out and find something interesting and learn about it and write about that. But I think that, you know, and you talk about empathy, and that's exactly right. I mean, as novelists, our job is to act as, to hold a mirror up to life, and to reflect that back. And, you know, you can call us ventriloquists, or you can, or whatever sort of metaphor you like, but you don't have to have experienced all of these things. You know, it's the essence of the thing is not only, I don't believe, exclusively available to someone who's lived through it. Pretty sure Stephen King, most of the stuff that's gone on in his books, he hasn't experienced. So the key is that empathy and that ability to you know, synthesize emotions, and use your imagination, as you said, and then tell a damn good story. Well,
I want to say something that relates to what Jim brought up. Jim, that's, you know, lovely, because Hemingway did write one of my favorite books about Paris, A Movable Feast, and he clearly knew that. So I think that it's what Zadie Smith said, you know, write what you know has become, unfortunately, a sort of stricture, stay in your lane. But if everyone stayed in their lane, you'd have a lot of very dreadful books written from experience, whereas you have a lot of good books written from the ability to enter into the world. And I think, okay, so let me just say this. I don't think anything is barred to you in what you write, but you have a real responsibility in how you write it. You have to get it right. You know, I'm writing about Paris. I don't want somebody who lives in Paris to come up to me and say, but Madame, you just completely got it wrong. That's not in this arrondissement. This did not have, Le Vaux did not have this building on Île Saint-Louis. So, you know, it hasn't happened yet, but I know that sometime, somewhere, a Parisian is going to just jump on me and say, you didn't get that right. Yeah. I tried, okay? I tried very hard to get it right. But if that was important to me, can you imagine the moral responsibility you have to get it right when you're writing about something like the Holocaust? You have to get it right. There is no room there not to. And one of the gratifying things to me has been that people who have survived the Holocaust, or whose parents did, have written to me to tell me that, yes, they're glad I told the story. So, you know, it's like, write what you want to know as well.
Right. And you're right about responsibility and about respect. And, you know, there's been a lot of discussion over the last year about these things. And yes, the stay in your lane thing is problematic, but I think that the respect is the issue. I mean, there's a wonderful book by, I think she's called Kira Jane Buxton, which is called Hollow Kingdom, which is, the whole book is told from the point of view of a crow. So, you know, she didn't stay in her lane. It's a wonderful book. So, you know, so we shouldn't shackle our imaginations, but respect. And you're right. I mean, I can't imagine a more. Did you ever think twice about tackling that subject on a fictional, in a fictional way? Because it's such an enormous responsibility and burden.
It is. And, you know, I never thought the first time about writing it. So the second thought didn't enter into it, because I was led to it by where the story was going, and I could not look away. And I will say something about this, that my parents, when the British left India and they divided it into two, you know, the partition into India and Pakistan, my parents lived in the northwestern part of India, which then became Pakistan. So in their own country, they suddenly became foreigners, and they had to cross to what was now India, but was a foreign country to them, and they never went back. So it was in thinking about what it must have been like for the Jews who were as French as anyone to suddenly discover that the country that they thought was theirs decided to draw a line, and they were no longer in it because, again, as with my parents, because of religion, there was that religious divide that was made. So it did allow me to explore some of the things from my parents' history that were of interest to me. And, you know, one of the things is, as in this book, as Sylvie finds out with Julien, that the really important things you don't think to ask until the people who can answer them can no longer speak to you. So,
right. And therein lies so much bittersweet tragedy. So we have another question from Marlene, and I know that you know Marlene, and I have a follow-up question on an entirely different subject. And Marlene wrote, "I admire the leisurely pace of Haunting Paris, particularly in your descriptions of historical and present-day Paris. For example, I'm thinking of the passage in the book where Sylvie is searching for Marie in the Marais district, which is a wonderful part. Do you describe the streets, houses, and residents, both present and past, in an early draft? Or do you fill in details when you come back for later drafts and revisions?"
Marlene, hello. Marlene and I were in writing workshops at the New York State Summer Writers Conference, and I always feel like we should be in the dorms drinking tea whenever I come across Marlene. In fact, Marlene, let me publicly thank you for connecting me to Alex and to Skylark.
Oh, that's right. Oh, I'd forgotten. Yes, of course. Yes.
Did.
Thanks, Marlene. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And Marlene, one of the things, that's a wonderful question. You know, I wish I were the kind of efficient writer, and I just get the feeling that Alex probably is, so I will melt into a humiliated puddle by the end of this. I wish I knew, okay, I'm going from point A to point Z, and so I need to research all this, and I will, and then I'll come back and do it. But, you know, I get distracted by point J and say, oh, what's there? So it's not an efficient way of doing it because, for instance, the story of Delphine, when I decided that's what I was going to write, I had to go back and do a lot of research at that earlier time into laundries in Paris, you know, which was not something I was expecting. And let me tell you, it is no hardship to have to keep going back to Paris to do research. But yeah, I've decided I'm going to pick only places I would love to go back to. But Marlene, the answer to your question is that it's sort of mutually reinforcing. You know, I find something that I'm writing about, I want to know more about it. And then as I find out more, that takes the story in a certain direction, and then it leads to something else. So the area you're talking about, where she is looking for this blue door, it's an area I know well. I have walked up and down that street. But when I was looking at it specifically to describe for the book, I had to know that street in a different way. And I'll just say one more thing, because hey, Marlene and I have read each other's early drafts, and Marlene, I hope you never saw an early draft of this because it was just absolutely putrid. But I think that one of the things that happens is, as we are writing, we sort of get a sense of when the language really kicks in. You know that you're on the right track. It's the language that tells you. So that's how you follow the story wherever it's leading you.
All right. So we've had Lily has put something in the Q&A. Lily, if you write your question in the Q&A, then I'll be able to ask it. So if you can go ahead and type it in where you typed your first question, that would be great. So on the subject of Marlene, sort of, I noticed in your acknowledgements, the very final word of thanks goes to MR, last and best of my teachers. Now, I happen to know who MR is. Can you talk a little bit about how you know her and what she taught you? And who she is, for people who haven't read her?
You know, this one of the nicest things about being a late blooming author is that it finally gives me a chance to publicly thank all my teachers. Beginning with 3rd grade, I still remember my English teacher from that class. But MR is Marilynne Robinson, with whom Marlene and I both took classes. And folks, if you are a Marilynne Robinson fan, her book is coming out on Tuesday, so order it from Skylark. It's the 4th in her Gilead, I was going to say trilogy, but I guess it's a quartet now. Right. So I went to the New York State Summer Writers Institute because I heard she was going to be teaching there. And I took some workshops with her. And, you know, it's amazing. She's not only a wonderful writer, as everyone knows, but she's also a really perceptive reader. And that's not always the case. You know, a lot of writers are not good readers, and certainly a lot of wonderful writers are not great teachers. But I felt, and this may not be true for everyone, but for where I was trying to go with my writing, I felt that she helped me to take a quantum leap. And I'll tell you one thing that stayed with me, since it ended up being, there was a mystery involved in this novel. And she said, don't make, you know, mysteries out of nothing. Don't make little mysteries. Save it for the really big thing. Like, you don't have to withhold information just for the sake of 2 pages later, someone will go, aha. You know, she said, like the death of Ivan Ilyich, you know, there is no mystery, you know, from the title that he's going to die, but it's where the story goes. So I owe her an immense debt of gratitude. Thank you, Marilynne.
All right, so also on the subject of craft, so Lily's question is this one. What is your writing process like? Do you weave together random threads from the universe, or do you sit down and meticulously plan and outline once you've done your research?
Lily, hello. Did I see you at Skylark for the...
oh, you did? Yes, Lily was there.
Hi. Hey, Lily. That's a great question. And now I'm trying to see how I can shut off this Q&A thing so I'm not looking at it. Let me just move it. Dismiss. I'm sorry. I'm just off here trying to... it says no open questions, but I'm trying to get rid of this. Oh, yeah, I did. Thank you. Lily, if I had any sort of efficient way of doing anything, you know, if I wrote an outline, I think my husband would be the happiest man on the planet, because I drive myself and him mad with writing these drafts and finding out where the story is going. And, you know, people are different. I'm not sure of Alex's way of writing. But something that Walter Benjamin, who's written a lot about Paris and about Flannery and about Baudelaire, right? He said something that writing is on 3 levels. You know, first, there is a musical level where it's composed. There is the architectural level where it is structured. And there is the textile level where it's all woven together. So I think for me, a lot of it is like shooting, you know, film wantonly. Just everything that occurs to me goes in, it's there. But when I edit, that's when I'm really meticulous. That's when everything that doesn't belong, even all the lovely things that I discovered that I wanted to put in the book. But the story has its own demands. It wouldn't allow it. So, it went off. So the cutting and the shaping and the structuring of it comes in the editing. How's that for you, Alex? Do you do the same?
Oh, I mean, I'm a completely chaotic. I sound a little bit like you, I think, Mamta, in terms of, I will sort of pretend to have some kind of outline, but I ignore it within a paragraph. I mean, it's a disaster, and I just go off and it's all. I mean, I like to say it's all very organic, which is just a nice way of saying it's just terribly unorganized. But I love the Benjamin thing about those different ways of looking at it and thinking about it. That is beautiful, and I adored that. That's really, really terrific. I loved the way that you structured the novel, the way that you did, as I mentioned ages ago, like the different, you use things like this, the article and these different things. You have this, a lot of the book is narrated by a ghost, an actual literal ghost, and the fact that you use multiple viewpoints, you go back and forth, and how very often, which I adored, you would have a scene, and some of these scenes, particularly early on when Sylvie first meets Julien, this sort of toe curling soirée with the children playing the piano, and how you will stop and start and chop and have a different character who carries on the story. And that's a wonderful. I'm sure there's some sort of cinematic analogy that if I was smarter I would be able to, but the way that you did that I thought was wonderful, and it was a way of just keeping the reader permanently sort of on their toes and sort of and engaged, and sort of, and just the way that these little shifts of perspective showed entirely new things, and sort of the whole thing about, well, I don't, is that giving something away? The whole thing about the 13th person at the dinner table, and these lovely little things, and how, so I loved all that. I thought it was wonderful, and I know that is not easy to do. It's very, very hard.
If anyone knows, it's you, because you did a lot of going back and forth in time as well. I want to relate this back to what Marilynne was saying about slowing down and going through. To carry on the film analogy, you can have two different kinds of action. You can have someone kick down the door and come in and pull you out of your bed. So that's one kind of pacing. And another is you can be lying there in bed and hearing the footsteps coming up the stairs and coming, and you're waiting for the knock on the door. And so since my thing is music, it seems to me like there are two countervailing impulses going on. One is, how the music is accelerando, you want it to go faster, but then it's also retardando, you want to linger on that passage. So I think in the pacing of it, that was something I was very aware of, to slow it down, because my thing is to, just move on, but you realize that you have to, and again, it's the language that tells you that this is where you need to let it really breathe and come into its own.
The pacing was exquisite. I thought, I really did think it was wonderful. Well, we've sort of gone slightly over our time, but I did want to finish up with one question, which is just about books, of course. And what have you read during these COVIDian times that have really sort of knocked your socks off? If you name a couple of novels that we can all run away and go and read.
Yeah. Okay. Before we do, everybody buy your books from Skylark right now. I'm going to buy The Time of Our Singing, and if you don't have it, you can order it for me, right, Alex? So I will order it after the fact. And buy my books. They don't all have to be mine. You can buy Alex's or any other books he's mentioned. So, okay, so I've been reading a lot about Paris and going back to books I've read before. I've been doing a lot of rereading because it brings me a lot of comfort to go back to a different place, but also in a different time. And a book that I loved, even rereading, is set in the same year as Alex's The Paris Hours. It's called Between Meals by
A.J.
A.J.
Liebling.
Liebling. Yeah.
That's so strange. I was just about to go and get it. We've got 3 copies on
All
the
right, snap them up, folks.
in our
They are,
food. It is such a wonderful book. I'm going to go and grab it because.
Okay, so while he's grabbing it, maybe you'll need to grab some more when I tell you these. So my passion is books. Yeah, just read it. It's charming, it's funny, and it will leave you feeling so satisfied as after a good meal. But I love everything to do with books and writing. So a book I read this year that I was really taken with is called The Anthologist by Nicholson Baker.
Oh, I love Nicholson Baker.
Yeah, I don't know if I've read other books by him, but this really knocked my socks off. I mostly read novels. That's, I just fixate on them. But I read a nonfiction book that read like a novel, and it's The Library Book by Susan Orlean, which I just loved. And this is an old book, but if you haven't read it, read it because it's all about books. It's called The Bookshop by Penelope Fitzgerald, who is just a smashing writer. And of anyone, I know Alex will appreciate that book because it tells you how important having a bookshop is to a community and how much poorer we'd be without it. So thank you very much for providing this public space.
Oh, well, thank you. That was so much fun, Mamta. I just really, really appreciate it. And it's so funny because I was looking and I was thinking, I'm going to mention the A.J. Liebling book, and then you did. And I don't know anybody else who's even read this book, but my copy is like underlined. It's so much fun. So he was a correspondent for the New Yorker, and man, did this guy like to eat. He lived for his meals, and this whole book is about that. It's just absolutely fabulous. Well, just to wrap up then, we love doing these online events, but in order to continue putting them on, we really do need your support. So please do buy any of these wonderful books that we've talked about. We would love to help you out with that. Again, it's mail@skylarkbookshop.com or 573-777-6990. Next week, we actually have 2 events for you on consecutive nights again. On Wednesday, we have a wonderful double reading with MU grad school alum Joanna Eleftheriou and Michelle Morano, who have both written exquisite books of highly personal and quite beautiful memoir. And on Thursday, Darren Strauss will be talking to Mary about his new novel, The Queen of Tuesday, which is based on his grandfather's affair with Lucille Ball. So there you go. Until then, Mamta, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation. I loved every second of it. It's been such
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everybody. It was great. You know, I feel like when you said it was an hour, I'm going, wait, already? But thank you all very much.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. And see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.